I think my background was always about curiosity. I like asking questions, and I like asking questions to myself and to the world and to everything that I see around me.
You've been through product design, you've been through architectural design. How did you happen to choose urban design?
I guess it was a very philosophical question at the time because I believe architecture and design, generally speaking, we have the responsibility to some extent of try to envision how the world could be in the future. I really wanted to have a larger impact, which means urban design was the best path forward in the sense it seemed to have the capacity to improve people's life in a meaningful way.
Did you build some sort of algorithm with that AI tool, or did you take those outputs further ahead in some other tools?
At the beginning, because of the limitations of all of these things, it was a process of learning how to prompt
Right.
and then realizing that it's a two-way conversation. Basically, it's not just you asking questions, it's both parties are asking questions. You're asking a question and you get an answer. It's the system telling you, basically, is this what you're thinking of?
Do you think there are ideas that come in your mother tongue if it's different than English, and you have to then sit and find the exact terminology or figure out a way to, modify that in English if there's no exact terminology?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most beautiful things about this is the way you relate a concept to a world. And that means that your vocabulary has to expand. Right. So otherwise, you're not able to describe the things that you want to see. Architecture has always been limited by the technology of its time. That's always the case. Like it's the engineering know-how at the time, or the invention of new ways to construct that allows you to represent and manifest this in the physical world. And this time is no different. So I think a lot of jobs are gonna be lost in that regard, just because a lot of the tasks need to be very repetitive. And there's gonna be a percentage of firms that will use this technology to do what they have been doing, and we will have access to new tools that are able to process more information, and we will see things and do things that was never really able to before.
Hello, Marco. Thank you so much for accepting my request for this podcast of ours. And it's absolute pleasure to have you. It's been a long time since we have met, and there's a lot that you have been up to in all these months and years. Some of your work has been really disruptive and as well as pioneering. Looking at the trajectory that I know of you so far, it has also been very inspiring for me. For somebody who comes with a similar course as mine, we were pretty much classmates, although different research clusters, but we were in the same course. And then the kind of trajectory you took from there was quite different, I would say. You have been taking on some of the very edge of the industry thing, where the whole new AI boom has introduced us to a lot of new workflows. The machine learning algorithms that we experienced back in our uni were also quite groundbreaking for that point of time. And some of the seed for AI, I believe, was already sown for us in the course. So we'll come to that. But I think before we jump into that, all the new exciting stuff, I would like to know how this came up to you. Like, how did you get inspired about learning into design, architecture? I know besides architecture, you've also been involved in some other product design or watches, especially. And so, yeah, tell me about your background. How was your childhood? What was your city like? How did you come about interested in architecture?
Of course. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to participate. I think it's quite important that we start having these conversations, especially given the nature of how things are evolving with recent events. Personally, I think my background was always about curiosity, which is an answer for all of the decisions that have been had in the past, at least from my side. It's just because of I like asking questions, and I like asking questions to myself and to the world and to everything that I see around me, because I like to understand things better as best as I can. And this is one of the reasons that things have been developed in the way they have been developed. You tend to see systems in architecture that are quite strict in many ways, and it makes sense given the nature of what we do. We have to be very strict and very careful. But at the same time, technology always dictates how the construction industry is going to develop. And sometimes it's moving a bit slower than it probably should. Yeah. So as a general background, it has been curiosity the driving force for all this, and architecture was never necessarily the first option when you're a kid. It's a bit hard to grasp the world possibilities that you have in front of you. Yeah. But there was always understanding of this want to create and to be able to manipulate some of the forces that I was not able to see, or at the time I found kind of otherworldly in a way. So I think the options as a kid were always somewhere, or the idea of what I wanted to do as I grew up were probably somewhere engineering, mechatronics, technology, etc. I feel that these realms are the ones that ask the questions but don't necessarily always stay in theory. They move into practice and development, and they are applied, and you can see the repercussion and impact of them in every single day when it's around. So the combination of that, and I imagine a bit of my family as well, because there's a few architects in the family. Okay. So I have an uncle and a cousin there. They're both architects. They have different paths, of course. One of them was recently, he has a long history of historical building refurbishing. Okay. So it's an interesting path, and he was director of one of the biggest universities, and therefore for I think he's still doing it. We haven't been, unfortunately, about content in a long while because of just the amount of work has been a bit too much to keep all of the acquaintances. But I think the moment he gifted me a book about Gaudi is one of the moments that I really understood what all these things could create. This really complex assortment of things can be manifested in something so beautiful as practical in some ways, not all, as architecture and design. So I guess the seed was planted many, many years ago, all these things coming and merging into one, and then eventually it resulted in the part of you see has been laid out in front of me as well.
Yeah. So you come from Mexico City, right?
Yes, I do.
So how's the industry of architecture and design in general over there? Does it have a lot of American influences since you are so close to that mega country? Or does it have very traditional style of its own where you are still rooted into it? Or is it trying to explore the path between the two?
It's a combination. Definitely, there's a lot of history that has to be respected. And as you know, there have been cultural icons as well in Mexican culture and arts and in history that are very well known and respected. And another important factor is Mexico City is one of those, amongst many cities that have a very unique past. As in, it was developed over on top of a lake. Engineering was key to develop something like this, and there's pride in this. I think people in architecture, generally speaking, in the design industry, they see this history that we have and share as something that they want to move forwards and really take pride on. So I think architecture has been reflecting that. And we have amazing architecture in Mexico City. I believe it's one of the places where you can see how materials are well respected. There's a lot of creativity and technique involved. So definitely helped inspiring in the path to go forwards. Now, I guess the opposite side of that as well is sometimes technology isn't as involved as in other countries. And by that, I mean, parametricism was not really well implemented into all the designs. Of course, it has been a part of a percentage of people know how to do good parametric design, but it was never at the core. Justified so, but it depends on the culture in the end. So it's a beautiful test bed of inspiration just because of how rich the culture is, how massive the flavor.
Yes, yes, definitely. You have some of the ancient, very ancient, amazing grand structures as well, right? So I'm sure it has been a very long history for it to reach where it is right now. So you did your undergrad in Mexico, I believe,
Yes.
right? So how is the education of architecture and design there? Are they forward looking, or are they still trying to figure out if you want to go the traditional way, or are they trying to find a path where you bring a Mexican identity into the mix?
It's still, I would say, at least when I had my instruction, it was very traditional in many ways. And I think that's in some ways a good thing, well, because it allows you to understand the gut of what it actually means to build. You get traditional ways of construction, you understand materials, you understand scale, and all these things are very important. And we'll dive into that a bit later in my thesis. Once you have these new technologies, you have to have a basic understanding of these things to be able to actually leverage the use of them. So I think, thankfully, we have good institutions for this. And I was lucky enough to be able to study at Universidad Iberoamericana, which I think has great professors as well, very motivated in what they want to do. In some aspects, they are forward looking, or they were forward looking at the time. In some of them, maybe the full force or the potential of what these tools could achieve was not really well portrayed. I'm not saying we had an introduction to Grasshopper or an example, but it was more on the side of, oh, this is a cool exploration, rather than, hey, this can not only improve your workflow speed and accuracy, it can also let you explore. So definitely not a foundational, strong foundation to develop further. But it's also the nature of how architecture works in Mexico right now. As you know, it's a country that's still developing in many ways. Mexico City has a lot of wealth, but it's not the majority of architecture. So it makes sense. The way institutions are teaching it is in a very specific way.
I can relate to you quite a bit because you and Mac in India, we are somewhere in a similar situation where we are also, growing, and we have a colonial past which we carry forward in terms of some of the history and some of the design language that we have in terms of our heritage buildings as well. And at the same time, since we are growing, we are also aspirational, where we want to find our own identities as well, and which is where I believe we are also trying to fuse all things together, something very similar to what you're trying to say. So did you have international outlook while studying there, in terms of more than outlook, I would say international exposure? Were you introduced to these kind of things, or did you try and explore these kind of things yourself?
I would say it was limited in many ways. Um, Exposure to that kind of architecture was something that was more implemented when I was moving to a more professional study. So specifically, I mean, in my time in Sordo, Magdalena, which is one of the largest offices in Mexico City. And then you see the scope of working in different projects internationally. You have competitions with, I guess, the biggest firms. And then is when you really understand what it means and what the architecture world has to offer. Usually things are different, or the way architecture is taught is different depending on background of the student. And when they are actively working in the industry, there's a different approaches, maybe a bit more pragmatic, versus when yes, it's the opposite. So it's the nature of how it happens. But yes, exposure happened later in the process, after I've learned the basics, so to speak. And then you realize that there's such a vast range of options you could take architecture, right? It's not only about doing houses or whatever you were, museums, something that you maybe were taught or not in your undergrad, but there's so much that you can do.
Yeah, definitely. So what year was this? Your undergrad and your first professional experience? Probably like 2013, 2015, something.
Yeah, so I think I started 2013, I finished 2017.
Was the penetration of internet already into Mexico before that, or did it start happening at that point of time? And did it start influencing the way things were moving ahead? Because now then with the internet, you have exposure, a deeper exposure to all the things happening around the world.
Yeah.
So did it do you think it influenced a lot of things back home, or especially for you personally?
Internet had already a big impact in, I think, my life and most people's life in Mexico at that point. It was already well spread and well established. We really had no issues with that. And thankfully, I've been able to be in contact with technology since I was in a very early age. So I knew computers my whole life. And internet was, yeah, I guess part of the daily schedules in some ways.
Yeah.
Although the access, and not only access, but also the how to say, the curiosity for architecture was not something really relevant when I was high school. Say just before going into university, that came at the moment of making the decision of actually just moving into architecture. So it definitely shaped the way I see the world, and it allowed me to teach myself, which is the basis of basically everything that's coming after. It's the same idea, just curiosity leads you to search for what is out there of what you currently have in front of yourself,
Yeah.
and then trying to amplify that vision, and that ultimately it usually takes you to the internet. You start with books, whatever you can have access to, and then when you need more, you look for options. You see the internet, it has a endless all the information, and then suddenly you're able to teach yourself anything you want to. So yes, it had a deep impact in
Yeah. So is that how you got into product design?
Yeah, that was a bit of a mix. I've always had a fascination with watches. I think they represent a long history of many disciplines that came into our systems. So it's not about only, telling the time or having a pretty design. That's actually maybe one of the lesser reasons why I like them. I feel the movement in them, they represent scientific tools in a way, very precise scientific tools that are a result of the work of many, many people for centuries, that ultimately ended up in this beautiful piece that is allowed to tell the time. So I found them very precious machines. And then I guess the business side of it is something that also attracts me a lot. So it was a combination of both, trying to respect that heritage, get design into the mix. And of course, there's always the business aspect, which is quite interesting. Yeah,
Of course.
as you develop in architecture, they don't really teach you much about business. So it was an interesting experiment to see how it operates, how you have to do marketing, how to do sales, how to take or keep a track of all the inventory, where to get it from. I was doing it as an experiment at the time with my then girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty fun and I would say somewhat successful adventure.
Well, that's actually a very interesting point that you made about watches. That they are not just pieces of watches that have evolved through time, but they're actually a culmination of a lot of design style, a lot of heritage, a lot of culture that has been put into a absolutely scientifically precise artifact, so to say. Right. So, how do you happen to think about London from there on?
It was not a place that I had really on my list. Yeah. It was all luck, luck in chance. What really happened is I had a friend called Miguel. He was studying his master's, I think, in energy renewables and in Aberdeen. So what happened is we were talking and we wanted to spend the New Year's, the end of the year, here in London and see the Northern Lights afterwards in Iceland. In that trip, I realized how great of a city London is. And I've been thankfully already to Europe and to the UK before, but it was more, 17 years old, 18 years old. It was just a fun trip. But when you come again and you have all some of these experiences and a different way of thinking, you appreciate different circumstances and the multiculturalism that I see here and the people and the mix and the result of the mix of all of these amazing people in London has an atmosphere that I haven't felt anywhere else. Plus, it's of course a test bed for a lot of things. So it was the perfect combination of things: the scale of the city, the potential of growth and research and development, and also the melting pot, as they call it, of many cultures. It seemed like the perfect place to be in. So even though I definitely think there are some other countries that could be maybe prettier or have better weather, yeah, Roma is very unique, and I knew that I had to come here one way or another to continue my work. Then the question was how to make this happen, and ultimately the decision was, after some years of working and researching, to do a master's to be able to follow that path.
You've been through product design, you've been through architectural design. How did you happen to choose urban design?
I guess it was a very philosophical question at the time, because I believe architecture and design, generally speaking, we have the responsibility to some extent of try to envision how the world could be in the future. So it's not this need to suffice the ego to try and say, okay, this is the best way forward. It's to try to experiment with, backed up by research, and try to propose ideas to see where we can take the future of humanity. And it was interesting and fun to do smaller scale design. I was doing some stuff of my own as well at the time, but I really wanted to have a larger impact, which means urban design was the best path forward in the sense it seemed to have the capacity to improve people's life in a meaningful way through design. So it seemed like a good alternative to also justify the movement to London. So that was the reason I was interested in it, and not only because of that, but of course working in projects in Mexico City, where of that scale lets you see how it impacts everyone, right? That when you have public spaces, it means that everyone, the whole city, can enjoy them. Versus architecture tends to be very personal, so you only impact a very small percentage. So thankfully, again, I was able to work in an office then called, it's still going, called Gaeta Springer Arquitectos, with Julio Gaeta and Luby Springel. And I think it was one of my first offices, the proper working experiences. And having access to, I was there by the last phase of Parque Ferrocarril de Cuernavaca, which is one of the ones that is crossing the middle of the city. You can really see how the ideas you have on there could benefit society. So I thought it was a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Um, how did Bartlett's absolutely different approach, which was a lot related to data aided design, which is quite a scientific approach to urban design, which is very rare to find in a lot of urban design courses and schools around the world, because a lot of cities around the world, in a way, they're still trying to find their identities or trying to grapple between the struggles of integrating technology at the same time keeping spaces very local to people and very relatable to people, so to say. Even though we were in the same course, we had very different research clusters with very different approaches. How did you happen to choose that particular research cluster? Because we had a choice on which kind of research we want to pick.
Yes, I've always had an interest for nature and animals, and I think the result of mutations and how they evolve and how animals evolve, we always could study them and apply what we learn from there to design. Of course, it has been done. Biomimicry is well known and researched, and the RC16 specifically was going in this direction. So unfortunately, my personal experience was during COVID. So I thought I was being smart by moving here as the first wave of COVID was coming down. And I was hoping that I was gonna be able to just get the best of both, which is you get to London and it's not incredibly expensive. So I was the same boat. So I was like, yes, this is the perfect moment. And then I arrived here and I realized the second wave was just starting. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, when you take these decisions in life, which are life changing, moving to a different country, you're gambling to some extent with the future, and you're trying to weigh your possibilities. And I was weighing on the fact that maybe having passed the first wave, there was a chance that things could come down and find sweet spot. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and that also meant that I was not able to get the most out of RC16. It's a program that requires you to be in the lab, to be have access to all the equipment and the technology, and ideally study some of these organisms to implement into the urban realm. So, with the limited hardware that we had at the time, just basically I had to set up everything in my room. ended up studying slime mold, as many people usually do. And there's a system that is also quite intriguing, Physarum polycephalum, and how it creates these networks by scavenging and looking for nutrients in the context and optimizing paths. It's quite an interesting idea. The approach they thought, I think, resonates still in the way of using adversarial networks to try to convert images into these patterns that represent urban design. But I believe it could be a program that I would have been able to take more benefit from. It was a 2-year program where the first one was doing the research and the second year was implementing into a realistic on development. What ultimately happened is that, first of all, it's a 1-year program.
Yeah.
So by design, you don't really get to that level. And then the outputs are a bit detached from reality, or what I would consider viable research paths, just because the I feel like some of the other stuff has been neglected to some extent. So the rationality of some of the most important elements of urban design, which is connectivity, hygiene, which seems something boring to talk about. Look, you are going into design, you don't really want to talk about regulations and infrastructure in that sense, but they are the core of cities. This is how they develop, and it became more of a morphological approach in many ways, just studying the form that you could get instead of the system, the blood vessels of the system. So I feel like it was an interesting experiment. It definitely was a great gateway into the next phase, but I didn't manage to get the full benefit of the brilliant minds that definitely exist in about it. There's a lot of great people doing research in there. Some of them working, some of them mostly studying. But I think if someone is in there in the university, they probably have a better experience.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. So when you do this critique that a lot of these things were slightly disconnected from the reality, do you think that that thought particularly comes because of the background you have from a developing country, or maybe if somebody was from, let's say, Europe specifically or USA specifically, where most of these urban issues are pretty much in the basics, pretty much resolved, right? And then they are already trying to look at some of the meta issues beyond that. They may not have the similar critique, or have you had a chance to talk to somebody of that background and you think the critique still matches for the both?
It's an interesting question. Most of the community that were in the same cluster as myself were from China originally. So, the system tends to be quite developed in this sense. They're quite a developed country. And we had a few similarities in thoughts, in the sense that it's really exciting to do all of this exploratory work, but the really, really difficult part is to bridge them both. This is this is the most difficult thing, which again we will touch base later.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what we're trying to do right now is it's to explore and see how far you can push all of these ideas and technologies, but land them, ground them, make it real, which is something that was lacking. Now, of course, we could make the argument that the Bartlett sets all of the ground bases for you to actually just do that on your own, and that's a very fair assumption. But I also think there is a tendency to have a very specific type of approach and result as well that aligns with the cluster. This is why year after year you see the clusters have a very similar type of end result and graphical style, etc. You kind of know what you're gonna see if you go into one of the exhibitions. With slight variations here and there, but you know the style, you know what you're gonna see. So
It's a budget exhibition.
yeah, so I can appreciate both, and I think with more time, definitely. But I would have personally, and I know that there's many takes on this, of course, and I think they're all valid. Wait, a lot of them are valid. But I would have enjoyed more if it was a bit more grounded.
Right.
The same exploratory nature, but I think the real value of these things is, yes, to understand how you can use this unconventional methods to arrive into a forward-thinking approach, but more importantly, the transition between the experiment
Yeah.
and the application. I think that's where the real difficulty lies.
Right. So, what kind of tools were you exposed to during that time? What were these new approaches that you're talking about? Can you name some of them?
Yeah, mostly cyclegan, like generative adversarial networks and PyTorch and
Is it a predecessor of the AI image generation that we see today?
yes, yes, yes. So just a few years before everything exploded, you had adversarial networks. And now that you see all the papers comparing one versus the other, they're not the most efficient at creating this because you have a system, you have something creating the images and you have something evaluating the images, and it's a loop. It's not as efficient, but it was quite interesting to see. They developed their own approach where basically you take a full image and then you compartmentalize or segment, and then you kind of recreate that into a larger scale because at the time, you couldn't work with massive images as you usually do.
Right. Yeah.
It scales up. So mostly that approach. I think that was a really innovative thing because at the end of the day, the study of slime mold has been quite extensive. So you can find already research about it, and it's more about how you implement it. The mostly adversarial networks, and I think personally, at the time, is the application of grasshopper tools that simulate that behavior as well. So the bridging the gap between what you could see in an exercise of taking a video of how it expands and then trying to replicate that through algorithms through Grasshopper to be able to estimate some things. And particularly in my thesis or the project that we developed at the time, there was a really interesting conclusion. What ended up happening is the element of understanding and trying to replicate London slime mold was not as successful because the limited tools that I had to work with, I didn't have a lab. It was mostly work on my own. So controlling humidity and having a slime mold growing I had it in my wardrobe. So it was not the ideal scenario, the most hygienic scenario to have everything the other way. But what really was interesting was after that, uh, a system was developed to be able to predict how cities could grow based on this pattern. So what happened?
How are they related? Like, how are you trying to relate the growth of slime mold to the growth of city?
Yes, so basically at the time, because the physical exploration didn't work out, it was a bit difficult to sell the parameters. But what we ended up doing, yeah, and what we ended up doing is we basically set a system that mimics how Physarum grows. We used it's based off of the work of already people doing.
So when you say a system, it's an algorithm.
It's an algorithm.
Right.
Yes, the system is an algorithm, and what it did it basically was scavenging for food and then creating the most optimized networks. But we set up a system where you compare. I think London. It was in like 300 years ago, whichever the latest map was at the time. We set that as the point of origin. Basically, we set that as the point of origin, and then we found out which were the nutrient locations for city development, which means an access to water, flat ground, etc. Very, limited in terms of the amount of information that you had at the time. And what happened is we let the algorithm develop over several generations, and we then averaged the result. So we went into London 300 years ago. You said what you would think the areas with more potential for growth just because of access to water and flood, etc.
Right.
And then after developing this and letting it grow 100 times, we average the results, and then what you get is a city that looks very similar to London. So it was able to predict how a city could grow just by using Physarum or the digital representation of Physarum as a way to estimate how cities grow. Of course, only applies to cities that were developing 300 years ago. That's not the same now.
Because you also need that kind of historical data to be able to match it or something, or does it only work because we have a certain trajectory of the city that we know about it? What was this algorithm? Is it a proprietary algorithm? Is it open source algorithm?
It was a combination. So the original one, I believe, is called Physarum.
Okay.
Then it was modified afterwards. There was a whole code of and a bit of Python as well, modifying the behavior to build on top of, to see how we can refine for the needs that we we wanted to drive the algorithm to. And the limiting factor, I would say, is not the amount of information per se. It's one of the factors.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that cities now grow in a very different way. So many years ago, it's basically build wherever you can, which is how many cities developed. It's like, hey, there's no really a plan for this. Let's see how we can develop, and it gets built. Whereas now we have so many rules and regulations on the way a city spreads. It could make sense to have a place developed in a specific region, but maybe in terms of politics, you can't build like this. So after all of these complex rules layer on top of each other, then the system that is so simplistic as just scavenging for the best plots and build there, it doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point, because historically, when you see the location of the cities or major cities around the world, they are generally located around water bodies or freshwater bodies, so to say, or they are either the ports where they can access other parts of the world. But nowadays, because of the conveniences that technology brings in to us, that your water is delivered to your home directly, your heating is delivered to your home, your electricity is delivered, the cities actually have grown beyond those requirements. And I get you why you could only predict something that is, ancient city. Yeah, that's a fair point. So was this sort of image diffusion sort of an experiment to begin with?
No, at the time it was mostly a grasshopper experiment that we then intended to convert into not diffusion yet, um, in the sense that we use now. But we found that the systems and the roads that you were creating, if you were converting one to one, with the result that you had from Grasshopper to what you could see with this GAN system, it was not something that we would put forward as a final presentation, because it feels like, roads are not really connected and it just doesn't make sense. And I had a discussion with the team. I hope they forgive me if you want to call it that for that, because I told them, listen, I don't believe that whatever this process is necessarily the correct route to do urban design. So I will just voice my concerns to the tutors that, like, although I find this interesting, it would be interesting also to see a way to apply this. So we didn't follow fully the traditional way of using this and then the GAN system to just create a final output. And then we thought a bit for that and ended up just doing something of a more traditional approach to developing the final proposal.
So yeah, moving further from there, you graduated, and how was the job search in London? Given this kind of, so to say, speculative approach in our master's projects, was it easy to explain your interview, or were they interested, or were they like, what do I do with your skill set right now? How did that go?
Thankfully, it was quite a smooth process. So, as I think it was after a few months or maybe 6 months of doing university, I realized, of course, part of this is first because we were during COVID the first few months. I had a lot of time to develop this. So, thankfully, I was able to push ahead in terms of the schedule of the program. And then because there was some things to develop and some of the interest was lost realistically over root of my full all my efforts into developing the work as a Bartlett. I shifted half of my capacity through my day to job searching and applying and finishing my portfolio and everything. And what ended up happening is I started working, I think, 1 or 2 months before finishing the degree. I told my tutors, listen, because of the nature of things, and thankfully we have enough research already to just, I'm just gonna, start working. I was advised against it, and in many cases, I guess it makes sense. I understand their concerns.
Yeah.
But I had to prioritize at the time, and the decision ultimately is to just start working as soon as possible. So yeah, before I think 2 or 3 months before finishing, I applied to Gensler, I think, which I had an answer from. And then I applied as well to SOM. And then they told me, yes, let's go into an interview and see what happens. And thankfully, things were quite smooth. So thankfully, I was able to work remotely with them for the first few months. I mean, it was a very smooth transition as well.
Was there anything coming from your Bartlett exploration?
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see because it's the polar opposite almost. They are very centered about making things buildable. And if you can bring some of the new technology, bring it in, which I think it's a very valid approach, and probably, this is why they're so successful. So when I got into it, so I had a glimpse of urban sequoia project, so involving very little elements as well. So, but I think it was the right approach to these things, is understanding how buildings are done in a way that S1 does quite well, and then bringing these new technologies. I believe they were working as well with algae to be able to convert. I'm not totally sure if it was into protein or also a source of energy, but yeah, it was an interesting approach to see how they were thinking of utilizing some of the infrastructure already existing in this towers, the urban space, to optimize to allow for this new, because it's a new system that you integrate as much as you have, water or electricity. It means that you have this biomass moving up and down and then providing another nutrient for humans in a way. So it was very interesting to see. But of course, it was a project that it had some limits, and yeah, it requires a lot of strategy from many parties to be able to fully develop.
And I believe this is the similar time when the whole idea of metaverse was picking up.
True.
And that kind of led us into this whole AI world very soon. What I remember for myself is my introduction to Midjourney was because of one of your Instagram stories. Midjourney was invite only or request only access in the beginning. And how did you come about to know about these tools?
So I remember there was some buzz about it online, and someone was doing experiments. I've always been interested in tech and all these pages showcasing new stuff and design. And I saw this post about this new tool. There was a model in Hugging Face. I can't remember the names right now, they're escaping me, but in Hugging Face there was a first version of it that I just needed to try. It was open.
Yeah.
Mirroring was access only by only after a few weeks, I believe. But yeah, it was the development of these new tools, and then I went to Hugging Face and started experimenting with it.
Hugging Face is the sort of like the marketplace of open source models.
And from there onwards, thankfully, I was in touch with some of the people that were doing some journey. The way it works is, if you get access, I believe you have the capacity to give access as well, or at least at the time. I got a hold of one of the keys that I could use then to experiment myself, and it completely blew my mind. It is just a new frontier from there on.
I believe it was still very primitive at that point of time, but I think it still had a great potential and we could see what was coming. So how did you build upon that? Did you continue exploring? Did you build some sort of algorithm with that AI tool, or did you take those outputs further ahead in some other tools? How did you go about it?
So first, I again, curiosity led me to experiment with the tool, and then I believe part of the process is to some extent healthy obsession to things. I believe the work that architects do sometimes tends to be a bit along the lines of perfectionism and obsession. And ultimately, having access to this tool begs to question what are the limits of this tool as well. And I was quite obsessed with seeing what I could develop, how I could morph it, how far I could take it. And then once you start to reach the limits, then you start looking for more options. Like, how can I get more control? How can I get better images? How can I upscale? How can I? So at the beginning, because of the limitations of all of these things, it was a process of learning how to prompt,
Right.
and then realizing that it's a two-way conversation. Basically, it's not just you asking questions, it's both parties are asking questions. You're asking a question and you get an answer. It's the system telling you, basically, is this what you're thinking of? Not literally in the sense that there is just a diffusion process happening behind it. It's trying to guess what is happening. Or notice. And the better you get at prompting, and it sounds so simple, you know, it's just put one word in front of the other, but it's more nuanced. What I ended up doing is I ended up testing word by word what it meant. So I wanted to see what it meant for this thing to be orthogonal, to be perspective, to be curvilinear, to, and once you see what the understanding of each one of the words is, you can start designing with language. And it's not just putting one word in front of the other. It's not give me a beautiful house. It's understanding its understanding of form and order. And once you get a hold of that as a system, you see that there's potential for this to help you visualize what you have in your brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's usually the path. Like it went getting access to these tools, being able to see the limits of the tool all the time, and then kind of experimenting with the current limitations of the tool. See how you can use other tools as well. So once you get to the limit of what it was possible at the time, then you take it to Photoshop, and then you take it to Grasshopper. I was doing a lot of trying to create depth maps, and then you just read, you know, the alpha channels,
Yeah.
the bias of like lightness in Grasshopper and convert to something else. Um, and then that, let's say that ceiling was just always going higher, higher as the models were developed, they were becoming smarter. I was able to understand the systems better. And again, I always try to go back. There's always, every time you go into a new AI tool, you need to understand their language. You need to understand what is it, how they perceive things, depending on how they were trained, and then you can communicate with it. It's always a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So where were you bringing these ideas from? Like, were you just taking inspiration from build projects or projects available on the internet, or just idea popping into your head, looking at things around you or images around you? Or were you trying some of the theories and philosophies and text available already around the world in terms of urban design, architecture, or other designs or anything? Where were your ideas originating from?
All of them, I think, from nature. I believe nature is the greatest architect, and I try to incorporate that. So there's a lot of, I think, from the work that is published, it's probably 0.1% of the work that I actually have produced. So if I see, like, if I go into my history of all the tools that I've used and all the images and ideas I've done, 99.9% no out there. Just because, yeah, this perfectionism is quite a tool, but also quite a roadblock in many areas. But it's that need to learn more and then see where it takes you that helps you.
That's a true designer, isn't it? You're never satisfied with a design. There's always something more you want to add to it. There's always something more you want to perfect. Someone, yeah.
But it's one of the beauties of this thing is it allows you to leverage the intelligence that exists somewhere else, which is not something that you can always do. You know, you take something in nature, there's a lot of things that already have a lot of intelligence embedded into them. If you take, for example, a fractal, if you take a pine cone, if you take a snowflake, there is so much intelligence in many ways. It doesn't have to be organic intelligence, but physics embedded into it, that if you convert this into something else that is related to architecture or urban design, they make a lot of sense just because the system that it's based off has rules that you can apply and modify to generate what is it that you want. So really, architecture and urban design, or design in general, is just one of the applications. There's probably many.
Yeah. So do you literally, like, say, for example, use the patterns of a snowflake? Are those little words, or is there a little more philosophical kind of prompts that you make into it?
No, I always try to understand the structure that is embedded within a world. So once you have words have a meaning in this language, right? Again, it's very useful when you go into these tools to have a mental library of what each one of the words is doing. So if you just go and prompt, okay, this is what a curve looks like, and you just prompt curve, and they don't need to add anything else, ellipse and maybe a stripe and this and that. Once you understand what is it that you're getting from the system, then you're able to use that information to design. I'm never asking for a specific thing, modifying concepts. So If I want a house that looks like a carved rock, I never ask for a house that is like a carved rock.
Okay.
I maybe go outside, take a photo of a rock, then edit it in Photoshop. Like I start creating the voids and where I think general speaking things could go, and then I start applying the AI process to increase the resolution of the concept that I have in my mind. But it's just the diffusion model, and this is important about how these things work. Diffusion models allow you to take a very vague concept and then add complexity into it. So it's not about prompting in the sense of taking you 100% there. Prompting is the way that you manipulate the information you see in front of you to get to the end result. And the best the best ideas come when you don't use any architectural terms in it.
Okay.
So the moment you start adding living room, it's the moment that you start shifting or skewing the system in one direction, which is well known. Like you're going
Right.
back to basics. So it never is in that way. The prompting is just a way to finish up and retouching a concept that you had previously.
So does that mean you need to know a lot of terms specifically to the meaning of it so that you know what the system is gonna respond? You need to also then improve on your language of English currently because a lot of prompting is mostly in English. Do you think there are ideas that come in your mother tongue if it's different than English and you have to then sit and find the exact terminology or figure out a way to modify that in English if there's no exact terminology?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most beautiful things about this is the way you relate a concept to a world. And that means that your vocabulary has to expand. Right. So otherwise you're not able to describe the things that you want to see. So if you try to imagine the word intricacy, it's not something that you would necessarily use in your everyday conversation.
It's also a bit ambiguous when you say intricate. It can be interpreted in a lot of ways.
Exactly, and this is the beauty of the design, and this is the beauty of these tools. It forces you to learn, expand your vocabulary, and use terms that you wouldn't necessarily use. So I had to research on cinematography to understand the angle. Thankfully, I have a background in photography as well. So it allows me to really visualize something and be able to bring it into because people don't really realize that there you have to describe things. Otherwise, it's not gonna read your mind. People always get frustrated because they have something in their mind because they don't see it immediately. They think, oh, well, this tool is just not there. And the reality is, once you start spending hundreds and hundreds of hours with it, you can basically imagine something and then visualize it by different methods, which is something you only see once you spend hours with the tool, starting to talk to it and testing different concepts. Intricacy is one of the words that you don't really know what it means. Absolutely. But then you type it to see what it comes and you're like, okay, this is what it means to the system in this context. So then you can start elaborating on top of. But it was not the only way to do it. Always the type of design I've done is the traditional way. So Maya, Grasshopper, or at the beginning just SketchUp, whatever. And it's about control always. So a lot of the time I did a design on Maya and just rendered it on R mode, and you're able to, at the time already 2 years ago or a bit more, you're able to generate variations of your own designs that have the same elements that you originally had. So that also meant that the paths you could take are infinite. So you can have a base idea and then again go to the system, ask a question as if you were having a designer with you and be like, what do you think about this? What do you think if we make this more X or more Y? And you have an answer and you can allow the system as much control as you want. You can say, hey, listen, have little input on this. Or, hey, listen, just do a complete reimagine of what you see in here. So there's a lot of intelligence embedded that sometimes it's overlooked.
Interesting. So does that mean as an architect, what we are taught that your ideas should be conveyed by your drawings or your visuals? Does that mean now we have to try and also put these things into words and very specific terminologies for if these workflows were to go forward in the field, right? Does it mean we have to start changing our ways of doing things?
Well, we definitely have to start changing our way of the things, but There is also something quite important for everyone that is looking to develop things like this is sketch is still king. The ability to convey things, and this is something that we always emphasize in the studio. If you come to this thinking that you're gonna be able to just type random words and get the result, you're far away from what you're actually gonna see happening.
Right.
There needs to be total control of the output, and in that sense, it's not total control as in, yes, it can mean exactly what you're imagining in your head. You have to be able to put it into an image, but also you have the capacity, you should have the capacity to visualize and allow a level of control. So you can start with an idea, let it flow free in slight directions, or completely just shift the direction. But a lot of the time, most of the work that is done is based off of sketch, or based off a wide massing model, or you need to be able to develop these things, and this is the key aspect of this. It's a mix of all the systems. You can go quickly, and because we have all the training, the formal training of grasshopper and rhyme and modeling and sketching, you're able to quickly, in less than an hour, convert a rough sketch, napkin sketch, or anything into a whole range of tests that are very similar to your original one.
Right. So does that mean that your starting point is not always the idea in your head? Sometimes the starting point to start interacting with the AI is also probably a image from your 3D, or maybe a sketch, or maybe a 3D. Actually, are there tools that take 3D files probably directly, or does it take images directly? I know there are tools which can convert a sketch into a rendering, but are there tools that can give you certain kind of a process to reach that rendering?
Well, this is the where it gets really tricky, because the advantage and the real ceiling in terms of skill for this tool is that it's infinite. I really mean that it's infinite in the ways you can approach it. I can take a photo of a Christmas tree and then take the way it's distributing the leaves and all the branches, and then you can use that photo to convert it into an aerial view of a city. Then you can start morphing that. So there is really no starting and end point. You can just move information freely from one point to another. So it could be a sketch one day, or you could, be walking and see the leaf venation patterns on leaf, and then you convert that into something else. Like, if really there is no limit. And then this is where the traditional architectural background is so useful,
Yeah.
because this inspirations that you can only get you so far.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to develop a master plan, then you're not going to be able to rationalize this idea. And that takes several processes, as well as architecture. You're going to do a cool concept, then of course, then you have to rationalize. But there's two different ways of approaching this. There's the highly experimental what if way, which is a lot of the work that has been seen in Instagram, for example,
Yeah.
which is attention grabbing, like
Yeah.
very crazy ideas. And there's the more formal approach, which is inspired by something, and then you just like slowly transform it into something very more rational.
Yeah. Right. So are the outputs possibility only limited to images at the moment, or can you start generating drawings? There are tools that can start generating 3Ds out there, which you can probably start using to detail out as well.
Yes, there's definitely a mix of those. You're able to move information freely, but you need to lay out the systems to do so. If you've been following the channel, I think you've been following STF as well. We managed to get other types of intelligences working for us as well. So, in the terms of urban design, you are able to use large language models, because they have a different way of understanding language to manipulate objects in 3D as well. Because at the end of the day, all these 3D objects are representations of 3D space numbers, which is something that the LLM can manage.
Right.
So yes, definitely there's a way of converting things. You need to add some extra steps for the time being. So the way we approach this for Urban GPT, for example, which I developed, you can use a system that already exists, which is Grasshopper and Rhinoceros, and then lay out the terms and rules, and use one system to inform the other one and be deployed in a traditional model such as Grasshopper and Rhino. But There's also other ways to convert images into models right now, which are still in development. You have Gaussian splatting, and then you have these mesh models as well. But the or one of the more important things about here, this technology is it's only the beginning. No?
No, yeah, absolutely.
So in 2 years, the development has been so exponential
Absolutely.
that I have absolutely no doubt that we're gonna possibly have a image to 3D model with the details
Yeah.
in the near future, and we should be, I believe, embracing that, but with the knowledge that comes with studying, beforehand,
Yeah, to
make it work as well.
yeah. This sounds to me like the era when softwares started taking over in late 90s, early 2000s, and everyone was speculating that, oh, how you gonna do this, that, maybe it's gonna be clunky, you would need a lot of investment in your technology. And 20 years later, we hardly use a pencil to draft an actual technical plan, right? Most people are now using some sort of a software. Do you see the workflow becoming completely AI driven in the future, or do you think the current softwares will somehow integrate it into itself? Because this is going to be a similar situation where some 20, 30 years ago, when the softwares were introduced in this workflow, and people were already skeptic as well as scared that there's going to be a lot of draftsman jobs which are going to be dropped down.
Mhm.
Um, People are also skeptic about that it's going to lose the essence of architecture.
It's gonna be up to the designer,
Mhm.
definitely. So one of the things that I've enjoyed the most is going or seeing a pivot from this 3D modeling workflow. Because what happens right now in a lot of cases with new designers or just designers that have been around for a while is you look for a new concept, and then instead of resorting to pen and paper, they go straight for Rhino, and then they start modeling in there, which I don't think is as efficient. Yes, you can measure scale and make sure that things are accurate, but you lose the essence of being able to think outside of the box and the tools that you have available and your knowledge of the tools, because then you tend to resort on, oh, what do I know in the software, instead of, you go to Grasshopper and you're thinking in Grasshopper terms, instead of trying to go back to the essence of design with your brain only. So I thankfully seen a change where, at least in the studio, we're able to go back to using your hands, using models, using sketches as a first way of exploring, and then increasing the resolution and the complexity or finding variations. So it will depend on the firm. There is going to be a lot of job cutting in repetitive architecture. Architecture is already quite repetitive, to be honest. Right now, the system that was established in the Bauhaus and all of this modularity based design has just spread everywhere. So we're now going for efficiency rather than really have an architectural style. So I think a lot of jobs are gonna be lost in that regard, just because a lot of the tasks need to be very repetitive. And there's gonna be a percentage of firms that will use this technology to do what they have been doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think there's space for everything. There's gonna be the value of having something inherently only human. So the process of still doing things the traditional way by hand and modeling and etc. And the value will be in that process. There will be something of a hybrid where you have people starting the concept the more traditional way, and then use AI to, and then there's going to be the full AI process as well. There's going to be space for everything. So it depends on where you want to take it. That's going to be the best approach. Right now, it's not fully developed yet. There are some things you can do, but it's also limited to the way we are exploring these tools. What I see happening is when we start embracing the technology more, and not only diffusion models, but really try to find the way to use it into our systems, we will see the potential that lies ahead. And you can already see this happening if you go. And the funny thing is, you need to move into tech, which is one of the things that I would recommend architects to do. If we start embracing all the stuff, right now we need to start embracing tech. And it's just not because of how diffusion models work, but because of how AI works. It's about finding and creating all these connections within specific elements of information. So right now it represents itself as, predicting words, predicting pixel values. But you have things like NVIDIA Omniverse, which this is a different type of understanding of space. You have these training models of humanoid robots that I believe recently they're saying like they were able to do something like 2 years of training in 10 minutes because they were running all of these things in parallel. And that's the future. Well, the future is being able to process this vast amount of information and then really use it for this. Because the truth is, a lot of the time, not all the cases, but a lot of the time, what happens is this sustainability is a bit of an afterthought. Many cases, it's of course at the core, and then you have all the certifications, and then sure. But in many cases as well, is run a solar radiation and that's it. So there will be a shift once the technology is a bit more evolved, in which you can optimize from the beginning, then assign to specific aspects. So I only see this improving, really. I believe we haven't even seen, like, this is just the tip of the iceberg in all of the aspects. And every single time a new model is released, we get completely blown away what it can do. And it doesn't seem like it's stopping. I've seen this pattern before. We have seen the part of how technology evolves.
Yeah.
People, of course, people that are involved into this and big companies tell you, yes, of course, it's only getting better because that's partly their marketing strategy. But if this system and if this exponential curve continues as predicted, it means that everything is going to change and we will need to adapt. And I think it's the moment to embrace these changes rather than fight it, because at the end of the day, what architecture is now is very different to what it was many, many years ago. So we also need to adapt with it and flow with the current technology. Architecture has always been limited by the technology of its time. That's always the case. Like it's the engineering uh, know-how at the time, or the invention of new ways to construct that allows you to represent and manifest this in the physical world. And this time is no different. We will have access to new tools that are able to process more information, and we will see things and do things that was never really able to before.
Absolutely. No, that's amazing. And of course, everybody awaits to see how technology, keeps disrupting our lives as well as our field, our industry, our workflows. And you have been one of the forerunners of accepting change, embracing change, as well as bringing change at some extent. That's what I believe. And yeah, I look forward to more of your work coming further. And hopefully we'll have another conversation with you in very short time when you bring out something to the industry that disrupts the whole idea of architecture.
For the invitation, and thank you as well for the platform, and for and to the audience as well for dedicating the time for this.
I'm sure there's going to be more people who are going to be inspired by this and going to try and put their time into all the workflows that we have discussed today.
Well, this is going to be a world of the daring to explore. This is a new set of rules where there are no rules. Basically, there is no textbook on how these things will be used. So it's pretty much for everyone to find out.